She was buried in darkness under Ceremony Hall, until Alpha King's instinct dragged him downstairs. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to our main character, Alencia. Alencia had never been a priority. The crowd in the grand ceremony hall roared with excitement as the ritual of the pack selection continued. It was a night where power was displayed and promises were made. The young wolves, full of energy and ambition, gathered around, waiting for their moment of glory. But Alencia, the poor Omega, was nowhere to be seen in the festivities. Buried in the shadows beneath the hall, far from the gaze of the Alpha King and the rest of the pack, she stood forgotten, alone in the cold darkness. Her presence went unnoticed, just another face in a sea of wolves more powerful, more respected, and more desired. She was cast aside. That was how it always was for someone like her. Weak, blind, an Omega with no place in a world ruled by alphas. As the night dragged on, the ceremony began to shift into its darker stages. The music grew louder, and the tension in the air became thicker. The Alpha King, a legend of power and mystery, stood high above the rest, commanding the room with every movement. He was the ruler, the one everyone bowed to. But Alencia, hidden beneath the floor of the hall, felt nothing but the weight of the world pressing down on her chest. She had no one, no family to support her, no pack to stand with her. But fate, as it often does, had other plans. As the Alpha King's instincts shifted, something deep inside him drew him toward the darkness below. It was an instinct he couldn't ignore, the call to something unknown, something powerful. His gaze locked on the floor beneath him, where the shadows seemed to come alive. Without thinking, he descended the stairs, each step heavier than the last, his heart beating faster with a force he couldn't explain. Alencia didn't see him coming. She was too lost in her own sorrow, her own pain. But she felt it. A pull, a shift in the air. And then, as though guided by an invisible force, the Alpha King appeared before her, his piercing eyes looking down at her in the dim light. He didn't know why he had come here. He didn't know why his instincts had led him to her. But in that moment, Alencia's life changed forever. The darkness that had surrounded her for so long was about to be replaced by something far more powerful, something that could not be denied. As the Alpha King stood before Alencia, his breath seemed to catch in his throat. She was unlike anyone he had ever seen. The moonlight filtered through the cracks in the ceremony hall, casting a soft glow on her pale face, making her blind eyes seem even more mysterious, as though they held a secret the world was too blind to see. She was an Omega, discarded and forgotten, but the very air around her seemed to hum with something far beyond her rank. He felt it too. The pull, the connection. He couldn't explain it, but it was there, undeniable and real. He knelt down before her, careful not to disturb the stillness, his voice barely a whisper. "Who are you?" he asked, his tone low, a mix of curiosity and awe. Alencia didn't answer at first. She could feel the power of his presence, even without seeing him. The air around her had shifted when he had approached. Something in her heart trembled at the sound of his voice. For a moment, she wondered if she was dreaming. She was so used to being invisible, to being ignored. "I am nothing," she finally whispered, her voice trembling. "Just a poor, blind Omega with no place in this world." The Alpha King's gaze softened. He could feel the weight of her words, the depth of the pain she had lived with. He reached out slowly, as if afraid of breaking the fragile moment between them, and touched her shoulder gently. "You are more than you think," he said, his voice carrying a warmth she had never felt before. Alencia's heart skipped a beat at his touch. The power in his words was undeniable, and yet it wasn't the power of a king she felt. It was something deeper, something more personal, something that made her believe, for the first time, that she might matter. She turned her head slightly, the motion slow and unsure, as if she were trying to catch the sound of his voice. "Why did you come here?" she asked, her voice almost a whisper. The Alpha King paused, looking at her in a way that made her heart race. His eyes were fierce, filled with an emotion she couldn't name. I don't know, he said finally, his voice hushed. But I couldn't ignore it. The pull. It's like I was drawn to you, to your light, even in this darkness. Alencia's breath caught in her chest. Was he speaking the truth? Or was it just some twisted fate she was being forced into? But before she could ask him more, the Alpha King stood up, his figure looming over her. He extended his hand toward her, the motion sudden, but filled with authority. I need you, he said, his words full of a force that took her by surprise. The pack needs you. You are the one who can break the curse that haunts me. Alencia's heart pounded in her chest, her breath quickening as the realization hit her. The Alpha King wasn't just speaking out of kindness. He was speaking out of desperation. Something was pulling him toward her, something that was beyond both of them. She had always felt like a burden, like a useless Omega. But here he was, offering her a chance at something more, something bigger than she could ever have imagined. She took his hand, feeling the warmth of his touch spread through her fingertips, and for the first time in her life, she felt like she mattered. The Alpha King's eyes locked onto hers as he pulled her to her feet. You will stand by my side, he said, his voice firm. Together, we will break the curse, and we will make them see you for who you truly are. His words echoed in the stillness of the hall, and Alencia felt something awaken inside her. The darkness that had once defined her was slowly being replaced by the light of a new purpose, a new destiny. For the first time, she felt a sense of belonging. She didn't know where this path would take her, but she knew one thing for certain. She was no longer invisible. She had been chosen. And with that thought, Alencia knew her life would never be the same again. As Alencia stood by the Alpha King, his hand still holding hers, she felt a surge of emotions she had never known. The weight of his presence, the raw power in his grip, and the words he had spoken seemed to resonate deep within her. He wasn't just a king. He was a man desperate for something she hadn't yet fully understood. The curse he spoke of, the one that bound him, was something darker than the world she had ever known. It was more than just an affliction. It was a fate that had been thrust upon him, one that could only be broken by a force stronger than his own will. As they walked together toward the inner chambers of the hall, Alencia could feel the eyes of the pack on them. Whispers filled the air, some filled with disbelief, others with awe. No one had ever seen the Alpha King show such vulnerability, not even when he had defeated his enemies in battle, not even when he had ruled with an iron fist. But now, with Alencia by his side, there was a new energy in the air, an energy neither of them could deny. Inside the chamber, the king's closest advisors awaited him. They exchanged curious glances as the Alpha King and Alencia entered, his hand still firmly holding hers. The room grew silent as the Alpha King stood before them. His eyes, once cold and hard, now seemed softer, filled with something they had never seen before, uncertainty. But that uncertainty didn't last long. This is Alencia, the Alpha King said, his voice steady but firm. She is the one who will help me break the curse. The advisors looked at each other, their confusion evident, but they did not question the king. They knew better than to challenge him. Alencia stood beside him, feeling a sense of power growing within her, even though she had no idea what was coming next. She had been a mere shadow in the pack, ignored and discarded, but now, she was standing at the heart of their world, beside the Alpha King himself. She felt both terrified and empowered at the same time. The king turned to her, his eyes softening as he saw the uncertainty in her expression. You are more than you know, Alencia, he said gently, his voice almost like a whisper. You have the power to heal me, to heal us all. Alencia didn't respond at first. She didn't know how to respond. Her heart raced with the weight of his words, but deep down, she knew he was right. There was something inside her, a force she had never fully understood, something that had awakened when she touched the injured wolf, the Alpha King, in the ceremony hall. It was like a fire had been lit within her, and now, she could feel it burning brighter with each passing second. How do you know I can help you? She asked, her voice trembling slightly. How can I break this curse that you speak of? The Alpha King looked at her, his expression hardening. The curse is not just a physical affliction. It's a part of me, a shadow that has followed me for years. It was cast upon me in my youth by a power greater than any of us. And now, it threatens to consume me. His words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of his past. Alencia could feel the tension in the room rise. She had no idea what kind of curse could have such power over someone like the Alpha King, someone who was feared by all. But she didn't have to understand it fully to know one thing. If there was any hope of saving him, of breaking the curse, it was within her. She could feel it in her bones. I don't know how, Alencia said softly, but I will try. For you. The Alpha King's eyes softened, and for the first time, she saw a flicker of hope in his gaze. He reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face, his touch gentle and reassuring. That is all I ask, he said. Just don't give up on me. In that moment, Alencia knew that she had a choice to make. She could walk away, return to the shadows where she had always been, or she could embrace this new reality, step into the unknown, and help the Alpha King break the curse that had haunted him for so long. She looked at him, her heart swelling with determination. I won't give up on you, she whispered. The Alpha King's lips curled into a small smile, the first genuine smile she had seen from him. It was a small gesture, but it made her believe that maybe, just maybe, they could do the impossible. Together. Days passed, and with each one, Alencia grew more attuned to the Alpha King's presence. The bond between them, once fragile, was becoming stronger with each passing moment, a connection she could no longer deny. She had always been alone, buried in darkness, both physically and emotionally, but now she found herself standing side by side with the most powerful wolf in the land. The Alpha King, Kalen, had opened doors to a world she never imagined. The curse that plagued him seemed to draw them closer, as though their fates were intertwined in a way neither of them fully understood. As they spent more time together, Kalen's trust in Alencia grew, and so did her understanding of the curse that had haunted him for so long. Every night, as the moonlight bathed the kingdom in its soft glow, they would meet in the royal gardens, where Alencia would practice the mysterious power that had awakened within her, the power to heal, to mend, to soothe the pain that lingered deep within Kalen's soul. I feel it, Alencia, Kalen would say, his voice raw with emotion. Each time you touch me, the darkness within me recedes, even if only for a moment. But it always comes back. It's relentless. His words were always filled with a mixture of desperation and hope, a dichotomy Alencia couldn't ignore. She could feel the pain in his words, the weight of the years he had carried this burden alone. It was hard to imagine the Alpha King, the ruler of so many, as someone so broken, but Alencia knew that beneath the hardened exterior was a man who had been fighting a battle against something far greater than himself. And now, with her, he was beginning to hope again. We will find a way, Alencia would reply, her voice steady despite the uncertainty she felt within herself. We will break this curse together. There were nights when they would simply sit in silence, staring up at the stars, each lost in their own thoughts. Alencia's world had changed so drastically in such a short time. She had gone from being invisible to being the center of the Alpha King's attention, the one person who could reach him in ways no one else could. As the days turned into weeks, Alencia's abilities continued to grow. She could feel the power within her coursing stronger with each touch, each connection to Kalen. But with that power came fear. Fear that she might not be able to fully heal him, that she might fail. The weight of that fear pressed heavily on her heart, but she refused to give up. She couldn't. Not when Kalen was looking at her with such trust, such belief. What if it's not enough? Alencia asked one evening, her voice barely a whisper as she held Kalen's hand in the quiet of the garden. The moonlight bathed them in its soft glow, and for the first time, Alencia felt the true extent of the bond between them. She wasn't just healing his body, she was healing his soul. It is enough, Kalen replied, his grip tightening on her hand. You are enough, Alencia, and that's all that matters. His words were a balm to her soul, but they only added to the pressure. She couldn't afford to fail. As their connection deepened, so did the danger. The curse was not something that could be easily undone. It had been cast by a power long forgotten, a force that had a deep, lingering hold on Kalen. The darkness that plagued him was more than just an affliction. It was a curse designed to break him, to make him question everything. But with Alencia by his side, Kalen found himself fighting harder than ever before. Each time the darkness threatened to overwhelm him, he would find solace in her presence, in the strength of their bond. Together, They were beginning to uncover the truth behind the curse, piece by piece. But with each discovery came more questions, and with each passing day, the stakes grew higher. "We need to go deeper," Kalen said one night, his eyes hard with determination. "I can feel the curse trying to fight back, trying to pull us apart. We need to find its source before it's too late." Alencia nodded, her heart racing. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing for sure. They were in this together, no matter what. The world outside the garden continued to turn, unaware of the quiet battle being waged within its walls. But Alencia and Kalen knew the truth. The curse was only the beginning of their journey, and they would stop at nothing to break it. Together, as the days wore on, Alencia and Kalen grew closer, the bond between them deepening with each passing moment. They had spent countless hours searching for answers, poring over ancient texts and speaking with sages who had knowledge of curses, magic, and the dark forces that lingered in their world. The Alpha King's curse was not easily understood, but Alencia's powers seemed to grow with each step they took together, like a fire that had been kindled inside her, burning brighter each day. One night, as the moon hung high in the sky, casting its pale light over the kingdom, Kalen stood at the edge of the royal gardens, staring into the distance. Alencia approached quietly, her presence known to him even before she spoke. "What's troubling you?" she asked softly, her voice gentle yet filled with concern. Kalen's gaze did not shift from the horizon. "The curse, it's getting stronger. I can feel it, like a shadow growing inside me, suffocating me." His voice was filled with an anguish that Alencia had never heard before. It was raw, vulnerable, and it broke her heart to hear him speak like this. She stepped closer, standing beside him, her hand reaching out to touch his arm. The moment her skin made contact with his, she felt it, the overwhelming weight of his pain, his fear, and the darkness that still clung to him. It was stronger than anything she had ever experienced, but it only fueled her determination. "We will break it," she said firmly, her eyes meeting his. "I know we will. I won't let this curse destroy you." Kalen turned to look at her then, his eyes filled with both gratitude and doubt. "But how?" he asked, his voice almost a whisper. "How can we possibly defeat something this powerful?" Alencia took a deep breath, her mind racing. She didn't have all the answers, but one thing was certain, she had to keep trying. She had to believe in herself, in her power, and in the connection that had formed between them. "I don't know how, but I feel it, Kalen. I feel that we are getting closer. With every day, every moment we spend together, the curse weakens. We're closer than we've ever been to finding its source." Kalen's gaze softened, his expression showing a flicker of hope. For a brief moment, the darkness in his eyes seemed to recede, as though her words had reached him in a way no one else's could. But then, the shadow returned, and he turned away, unable to face her fully. "I want to believe that," he said quietly, "but the curse isn't just about me. It's about the future of the pack, the kingdom. If I fail, everything will fall apart. I can't afford to fail." Alencia stepped in front of him, her hand gently cupping his face, forcing him to look at her. "You won't fail," she said softly. "You've already fought so many battles, Kalen. This is just one more. And you don't have to fight it alone." Kalen closed his eyes for a moment, his breath catching in his chest as he absorbed her words. When he opened his eyes again, they were filled with a mixture of gratitude and fear. "I don't want to drag you into this, Alencia. It's not your fight." Alencia shook her head. "It is my fight, Kalen. It always has been. I was born for this moment. To heal you, to help you. Together, we will destroy this curse." She could see the doubt still lingering in his eyes, but she also saw the flicker of belief that had begun to take root. He took her hand then, his grip tight, as if he were afraid she might slip away. "Then let's finish this," he said, his voice low but filled with resolve. Together. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with the promise of what was to come. They had no idea what the future held, but for the first time in a long while, both Kalen and Alencia felt a spark of hope that had been absent for so long. They knew the journey ahead would not be easy, but they were ready. They would face whatever came their way, side by side, united in purpose, determined to break the curse and secure a future together. As they stood in the moonlight, the weight of their mission heavy upon them, they knew one thing for certain. Their bond was unbreakable, and nothing could stand in their way. As the days passed, Alencia and Kalen grew closer, their bond deepening with every challenge they faced together. The curse that had plagued the Alpha King for so long was not an easy enemy to fight. Every step forward felt like 2 steps back, but with each failure, they grew stronger, more determined. The nights in the royal garden had become their sanctuary, a place where Alencia could practice her healing abilities, and where Kalen could be free from the watchful eyes of the pack. They would often sit together in the stillness of the night, the moon casting its light on the darkened garden, and Kalen would tell her stories of his past, of the battles he had fought and the enemies he had slain. He spoke of his father, the former Alpha King, whose cruelty had scarred Kalen so long before the curse had taken hold of him. "My father was a tyrant," Kalen said one evening, his voice heavy with regret. "He ruled with fear, not love. I never had a choice in the matter. And when he died, the throne was mine to take. But the darkness, it followed me, inherited from him." Alencia listened quietly, her heart aching for him. She could see the weight of his past, the pain he carried, and she longed to ease it, but the more she learned about him, the more she realized how deep the curse ran. It wasn't just magic, it was a part of him, a curse that had been tied to his very bloodline, passed down through generations, a legacy of darkness that he could not escape. "You don't have to carry this burden alone, Kalen," Alencia said softly, reaching out to take his hand. "I'm here with you. I've always been here, even when I didn't know it." Kalen turned to look at her, his eyes filled with gratitude and sorrow. "I never wanted you to be part of this," he said, his voice quiet but earnest. "You deserve a life free of this darkness, free of me." Alencia shook her head, squeezing his hand tightly. "I don't want a life without you, Kalen. I want to be by your side. Together, we can break this curse. Together, we can find a way." Her words, so full of conviction, brought a flicker of hope to his eyes, but that hope was quickly extinguished by the reality of the curse. The next night, they stood together in the royal archives, the dim light of a single candle casting long shadows on the walls. The books around them were ancient, their pages worn and faded, but there was something about them that called to Alencia, something that seemed to whisper to her soul. She could feel the power of the texts, the magic they contained, and she knew that the answers they sought were hidden within these pages. "We've been looking in the wrong places," Kalen said, his voice filled with frustration as he flipped through another book, finding nothing but more dead ends. "There's nothing here that can help us." But Alencia wasn't ready to give up. She could feel the energy in the air, the same energy that had drawn her to Kalen in the first place, the same energy that had sparked when she had healed him that first time. "We need to go deeper," she said, her voice steady, her heart racing. "We need to find the origin of the curse, not just the symptoms." Kalen looked at her, his gaze intense. "You're right," he said, his voice quiet but full of resolve. "We have to go deeper. If we're going to break this, we need to understand it completely." The air around them seemed to shift, as though the very walls of the archives were responding to their determination. The magic that had been dormant for so long seemed to stir, as though it, too, was waiting for them to find the answers. "Then let's do it," Alencia said, her eyes meeting his with a fire that mirrored his own. Together, the days that followed were filled with more research, more searching, and more discovery. They uncovered long-forgotten rituals, ancient spells, and old legends that spoke of a time when the curse had first been cast. But the more they uncovered, the more they realized how dangerous their quest had become. They were not just fighting a curse. They were fighting a force that had been growing in power for centuries, a force that would stop at nothing to keep Kalen in its grip. The darkness that surrounded him was growing stronger, and with each passing day, the danger to both of them increased. But Alencia refused to back down. She would not allow Kalen to fall to the curse, not when they were so close, not when there was still hope. "We'll find a way," she whispered, her voice filled with determination. "I won't let anything happen to you." Kalen looked at her, his heart swelling with gratitude, but also with something deeper, something he had never allowed himself to feel before. "Love, I don't deserve you, Alencia," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "You've given me more than I ever thought possible." Alencia smiled softly, her heart full. "You don't need to deserve me, Kalen. We're in this together. And together, we'll break the curse." As they stood together in the quiet of the royal archives, surrounded by the knowledge they had uncovered, they knew that their journey was far from over. But for the first time, they both believed that victory was within their grasp. The journey to break the curse had brought Alencia and Kalen to a pivotal point. After countless hours of research, nights filled with intense discussions, and moments of uncertainty, they were finally on the edge of discovering the source of the darkness that plagued Kalen. As they stood together in the royal archives, surrounded by ancient texts and forgotten knowledge, Alencia felt a surge of determination. They were so close to understanding what had been hidden for centuries. Kalen stood beside her, his eyes scanning the pages of an old, tattered book that seemed to hum with power. The air around them was charged, thick with anticipation. "This is it," Kalen said, his voice low, a hint of excitement in his tone. "I can feel it. We're close." Alencia nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew that they were at a crossroads. One wrong move, one mistake, and everything could fall apart. The curse had been set in motion long before they had even met, and undoing it would not be easy. It was more than just magic. It was a part of Kalen's lineage, something embedded in his very blood. But Alencia had never been one to shy away from a challenge, not when the stakes were so high. "We can do this," she said, her voice steady despite the weight of the task before them. "We have to. We're the only ones who can break this." Kalen turned to her then, his gaze intense and filled with a mixture of gratitude and fear. "What if we're wrong?" he asked quietly. "What if we can't break it?" Alencia reached out, her hand finding his, the warmth of her touch grounding him. "We won't know unless we try," she said softly. "And we're not doing this alone. We have each other." Kalen's heart swelled at her words. She had been his strength when he had none left, and now, with her by his side, he felt as though he could face anything. Together, they were unstoppable. The curse might have been powerful, but their bond was stronger. As they continued to study the ancient texts, they uncovered a ritual, one that seemed to hold the key to breaking the curse. It was a dangerous ritual, one that required them to face the very darkness that had taken hold of Kalen. The price for failure was high, but the reward, freedom from the curse, was worth any risk. "We have no choice," Kalen said, his voice resolute. "We have to do this. For the kingdom, for us, for everything." Alencia nodded, her resolve matching his. "We'll do it together." That night, under the light of a blood-red moon, Alencia and Kalen prepared for the ritual. The air was thick with magic, and the garden around them seemed to come alive with energy. They stood at the heart of the royal grounds, surrounded by candles and ancient symbols etched into the earth. The ritual required them to bind their magic together, to use their shared strength to confront the curse head-on. "Are you ready?" Alencia asked, her voice barely a whisper as she stood before Kalen. His eyes were filled with a fierce determination, and for the first time in a long time, there was no fear in his gaze. "I'm ready," he said, his voice low but filled with conviction. They joined hands, and as they did, a surge of energy passed between them, like a current of power that coursed through their bodies. The symbols around them began to glow, the candles flickering with an otherworldly light. As they focused on the ritual, the darkness that had plagued Kalen for so long began to stir, twisting and writhing in the air around them. It was a force like nothing they had ever faced before, a darkness so powerful it seemed to choke the very life from the air. But together, they held their ground. The magic that flowed between them was more than just a bond. It was their will, their hope, and their love for each other. With every breath, Alencia could feel Kalen's power growing stronger, and with each passing second, the curse began to weaken. The darkness fought back, thrashing violently, but Alencia and Kalen refused to relent. "We're so close," Alencia thought, her mind focused on the light that was beginning to shine through the darkness. "We can do this." And then, with one final surge of power, the darkness shattered. It was a moment of pure clarity, a burst of light so brilliant it seemed to erase the very shadows that had clung to Kalen for so long. The curse was broken. The air around them grew still, the oppressive weight that had been hanging over Kalen lifted. He was free. Alencia collapsed into his arms, exhausted but elated. "We did it," she whispered, her voice shaky but filled with relief. Kalen held her tightly, his heart full of gratitude and love. We did it, he repeated, his voice thick with emotion. For the first time in years, Kalen felt free, truly free. The curse had been broken, and together, they had proven that no darkness was too powerful to overcome. As the first rays of dawn broke through the sky, Kalen and Alencia stood together, ready to face whatever the future held. They had broken the curse, but their journey was far from over. Together, they would face whatever challenges came their way, knowing that as long as they stood side by side, there was nothing they couldn't conquer. The dawn after the curse was broken brought a new sense of peace to the kingdom, and to Alencia and Kalen. The weight that had hung over Kalen for so long had finally lifted, and though the battle was won, the scars of the past would remain. They had shattered the darkness that had plagued him, but it was clear to both of them that their journey was far from over. They stood together, side by side, in the quiet aftermath, with the first light of morning casting its soft glow over the land. As they walked through the royal gardens, the place that had once been a sanctuary for their secret meetings, there was a newfound hope in the air. Alencia, her heart still racing from the intensity of the ritual, couldn't help but feel a sense of awe. She had never imagined that she would find herself here, with Kalen, the Alpha King, in a moment of peace. We did it, she whispered as if saying the words aloud would make it all more real. Kalen turned to her, his expression softer than it had ever been before. We did, he agreed, his voice full of gratitude. He reached for her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers, a gesture that once would have been unimaginable for someone of his status. But now it felt right. I don't know how to thank you, Alencia, Kalen continued, his voice filled with sincerity. You saved me, and you saved this kingdom. I owe you everything. Alencia shook her head gently, a smile playing at the corners of her lips. You don't owe me anything, she said. We did this together. This is our victory, Kalen. As they walked further into the garden, the tension that had once defined their relationship had dissolved. Kalen no longer looked at her with the weight of a king who had to be strong, nor did he look at her with the distance of a ruler separated from those he led. Instead, he looked at her as someone who had been through hell and back, someone who had shared in the darkness and had come out stronger because of it. The bond they had formed was unbreakable. It was more than just the curse they had defeated. It was the love and trust they had built between them, something that no power could ever take away. But even in this moment of peace, there was still work to be done. The kingdom needed to heal, and though Kalen was no longer burdened by the curse, the scars of his rule and his father's tyrannical reign were still fresh. There were those in the pack who had not yet accepted the change in leadership, those who had feared Kalen's power when it was at its darkest, and those who saw Alencia as nothing more than a distraction. Kalen knew the road ahead would not be easy. There is still much to be done, Kalen said, his voice heavy with the responsibility that he could never escape. I must unite the pack, bring peace to the kingdom, and show them that I am not my father. But with you by my side, I know I can do it. Alencia squeezed his hand, her heart swelling with pride. And you will, she said with certainty. Together, we can lead them. Together, we can change this kingdom. The bond between them had become the foundation upon which they would rebuild the future. It wasn't just about breaking curses and overcoming darkness anymore. It was about building a legacy, one that would endure for generations. As they continued to walk through the garden, the sounds of birds chirping and the gentle rustling of the trees filled the air. It was a peaceful morning, the calm after the storm, and for the first time, Alencia felt like she belonged. The quiet had settled into their lives, but the promise of what was to come hung in the air, as bright and powerful as the sun rising in the sky. Their future was uncertain, but together, they would face whatever came their way. There was no curse that could break their bond, no force that could tear them apart. Alencia knew, with every fiber of her being, that this was just the beginning of their journey. The darkness was gone, but the light they had found together was only just beginning to shine. As the weeks turned into months, the kingdom began to heal, and so did Kalen and Alencia. The curse that had once haunted them both was nothing more than a distant memory now, but the aftermath remained. The scars, though invisible to the eye, had shaped them both in ways that would never be undone. For Kalen, it was a new beginning, a chance to rule with the strength of a king who had faced his own darkness and come out stronger. But it was not without its challenges. There were still many in the pack who doubted his ability to lead, who could not yet see the transformation he had undergone. Some saw him as a king born from a legacy of cruelty, unable to escape the shadow of his father's reign. But Alencia stood beside him, unwavering, a symbol of the change he had fought for. She had always believed in him, even when he couldn't see the light himself. Together, they began to rebuild, piece by piece, restoring not only the kingdom but also the trust that had been lost. "They will come around," Alencia said one evening, as they sat together in the royal garden, the stars twinkling above them. Kalen's gaze was distant, his thoughts lingering on the future. "I'm not sure they will," he replied, his voice tinged with uncertainty. "Some of them still see me as the monster I was before." Alencia turned to him, her hand gently resting on his. "You are not that man anymore," she said softly, her voice full of conviction. "You are the king they need, the king who will lead them into the future." Kalen met her gaze, his eyes filled with gratitude. For the first time in a long while, he believed her words. The darkness that had clouded his vision for so long had cleared, and in its place was a vision of hope. Hope for a better future, not just for him, but for the kingdom. And with Alencia by his side, he knew anything was possible. The next few years were a time of growth and transformation for both the kingdom and its rulers. Kalen worked tirelessly to unite the pack, to bring together the fractured factions that had once feared and resented him. And slowly, the people began to see him for who he truly was, not a monster, but a king who had fought his own demons and emerged victorious. The kingdom flourished under his reign, and as the years passed, the old wounds began to heal. But it was not just the kingdom that had changed. Alencia, too, had transformed. The timid, invisible Omega who had once hidden in the shadows had become a force to be reckoned with, a woman of strength and resilience. She had helped Kalen defeat the curse, but she had also helped him build a legacy that would be remembered for generations. One evening, as they stood together on the balcony of the castle, looking out over the kingdom they had built together, Kalen turned to Alencia, his expression filled with admiration. "I couldn't have done this without you," he said, his voice low but full of emotion. "You were my light when I was lost in the darkness. You showed me that there was always hope." Alencia smiled, her heart swelling with pride. "We did this together, Kalen," she said softly, her voice full of love. "You were the strength, and I was the light. Together, we made the impossible possible." As they stood there, side by side, watching the sun dip below the horizon, they knew that their journey was far from over. They had broken the curse, rebuilt the kingdom, and found love in the process. But the future was still uncertain, and the challenges that lay ahead were unknown. Yet, with each other, they knew they could face whatever came their way. The past had shaped them, but it was the future that they would build together. And together, they would conquer anything that stood in their path. For they had already overcome the greatest obstacle of all, the darkness within themselves. The light had returned, and with it, a new dawn for the kingdom and for their love. Their journey was just beginning. In this captivating werewolf story, a powerful alpha king struggles with a dark curse that has haunted him for years, threatening not only his life, but also the fate of his kingdom. As he searches for a way to break the curse, he discovers an unlikely ally in Alencia, a blind Omega, who possesses the strength and power to heal him. Together, they must face the darkness within, uncover ancient secrets, and confront their deepest fears. Their bond grows stronger with each passing day, as they navigate the world of werewolves, where love, power, and destiny collide. With the curse finally broken, Alencia and Kalen must rebuild their kingdom and face new challenges that threaten their newfound peace. But their journey is far from over, and as they discover, the power of love and the werewolf bloodline is greater than they ever imagined. This tale of transformation, healing, and resilience will keep you hooked until the very end, as the werewolves fight to protect their future. Join them on their incredible adventure in a world filled with danger, magic, and love.